We're so glad to have you here tonight for our Buying Solar 101. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Alrighty, does that look okay? Looks good, perfect. Well, thanks everybody. This is our, I think, third round of our statewide Buying Solar 101. So we've had a few opportunities to get this information out. It's been really fun to work with my compatriots here to help educate you about what you need to know if you're interested in going solar this year or next. If we haven't met before, my name is Adrian Keller. I'm the Arizona Program Director for Solar United Neighbors, or SUN for short, based out of Phoenix. And I'm really thankful to be joined by Autumn Johnson with the Arizona Solar Energy Industries Association, as well as Kate Bowman from Vote Solar. Just a couple pieces of housekeeping before we get started. We are in a webinar, so the presenters cannot see or hear you, but we want to answer as many questions as possible. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box. If it's not popping up, click more, and then you'll be able to see it. If you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, please use that. We are recording this session, and so we're going to wait to answer questions at the end so we have a nice, clean recording. But please feel free to type those questions in as you go. There's also a chat box. Anybody can see what you put in there, so use that more for just a quick comment or something. But if you want us to answer your question, use the Q&A. Additionally, if you're somebody who likes closed captions, you can enable those by clicking more at the bottom of your screen. Click captions, show captions, select your preferred language, and then hit save. I'll just leave these instructions up for one more moment in case anybody needs to read those. Everybody who registered for this will get a copy of these slides and a recording of this webinar after the fact. So we have you covered right there. So let's start talking a little bit about why people want to go solar in the first place. I think it's fair to say probably the most common reason, especially that I hear, is to save money. By installing solar panels on your home, you're able to generate some of or most of your own electricity. This reduces the amount of electricity you need to purchase from your utility, which helps you save money. I also hear from a lot of people who are interested in going solar for what you could call reasons of energy independence, essentially having the ability to generate and consume your own electricity that you have a say in instead of being beholden to one monopoly utility company. Additionally, solar, especially when it's paired with battery storage, increases resilience in general for you and the grid and can help insulate you from power outages, especially with that battery storage. And distributed solar in particular, meaning power that is generated at or close to where it's needed, like rooftop solar, is especially helpful at improving the stability and resilience of our grid overall. Rather than just relying on a few very large power plants miles and miles away, if we generate power close to where it's needed, that benefits the grid as a whole. Additionally, a lot of people are worried about future price hikes for their electric bill. If you're a TEP or an APS customer or a UNS customer, you've probably seen some notices that there are some price increases coming, and those aren't going to stop. Rooftop solar can be a really helpful tool to help you reduce some of those shocks to inflation and other price increases by creating a more steady and reliable flow of electricity for your home. Water savings is another big one, especially here in the West. Our coal and nuclear, our gas plants use a lot of water just to function. Solar uses next to none, which is a really huge advantage for us here in Arizona. And then, of course, we're the sunniest state in the nation. Florida may call themselves a sunshine state, but we have more sunshine than them. This is one of our most abundant natural resources, and we should be taking advantage of that to generate our power rather than relying on dirty fossil fuels that are piped in from out of state or out of the US. So regardless of why you're interested in going solar, we're happy you're here and we're happy to help. So if you're new to all this, it may be helpful to understand just a little bit about how rooftop solar in particular works. So when we're talking about solar tonight, we're mainly referring to PV or photovoltaic solar. There's also solar hot water heating and solar thermal technologies, but tonight we're really just focusing on PV solar, which helps generate electricity from sunshine. Solar panels are made up of several semiconducting materials, mostly silicon, that hold a charge. And when photons from sunlight hit your solar panel, it dislodges those electrons, which starts a flow of electricity. You'll have an inverter with your system that inverts the flow from a DC direct current to AC alternating current so that your appliances and everything in your home can actually use the power that your panels are producing. And then of course you'll have an electrical panel. You already have an electrical panel, but it's especially important when you have rooftop solar. We kind of think of that as the brains of the operation. So it's directing power where it's needed, when it's needed. And then solar customers will have what's called a bidirectional utility meter. This is really important because you need to be able to, or excuse me, your utility needs to be able to read and measure how much electricity you're purchasing from them. But it also needs to flow the other way, right? When you have rooftop solar, if you're producing extra electricity that you're not needing, that's flowing back out onto the grid for credit on your bill. And so that bidirectional utility meter can read both. So if you have rooftop solar and you're at home and your panels are generating electricity, that electricity is going to flow to power your home first. If there's extra and you have a battery, it'll first power up that battery. And if you don't have a battery, then any extra that you're not using will just flow back onto the grid and your utility will credit you for that at some level. And one of the really cool things about rooftop solar is that that power is immediately powering your neighbors and any businesses or buildings immediately surrounding your building. So if you go rooftop solar, anytime you're producing extra, you're literally helping to power your neighbors with clean energy, which is pretty cool. One of the most common questions we get is, what do I need to go solar? What about my house or my roof? So a few kind of just checklist here for you. Since we're in Arizona, you essentially need to be a property owner in order to install solar. Unfortunately, we don't have community solar or other programs that allow renters to directly benefit. And so if you want to go solar, you really need to be the owner of your property. It's really important to check and make sure that there's not a significant amount of trees or other shading or buildings that are casting a large shadow on your roof where the solar panels will be. It's pretty common for people to trim their trees back in order to go solar, but if you have a huge hedge in front of your roof or something, then that might not be the best option. And so just good to know going into it. The size, shape, and slope of your roof itself is also really important. Ideally, you're going to want your panels to be somewhere between a 15 to 40-degree slope. But don't worry if your roof is not at that angle. Installers have a variety of tools and techniques they can use to angle your panels at the optimal angle. And then ideally, you're going to want to place your solar panels on your roof that faces south. That will enable them to absorb the most amount of sunlight and generate the maximum amount of electricity. But if you install solar on the west side or the east side of your roof, that can work just fine. West facing can actually be really advantageous because you're able to generate a little bit more electricity as the sun is setting, which tends to coincide with some of those peak hours from your utility. And then the age and quality of your roof, we generally recommend you should have at least 10 to 15 years life left in your roof before you go solar. And your roof needs to be in decent enough condition. It's a huge pain if you have to go solar and then pay somebody to come and remove your panels, get some roofing work done, and then reinstall them. And so that can be done, but it's really best practice to make sure your roof has a good lifespan left before you go solar. And then we definitely recommend getting a roof inspection from somebody separate than the solar installer you're planning to work with, just to double check that your roof is in good structural condition before the installer starts making those penetrations. Now, if you're not sure about any of this, you don't know if you're a good site for solar, I highly encourage you to reach out to Solar United Neighbors, the organization I work for. I'll drop my contact information at the end of this. We can do a free satellite roof review for you to check all of these things that I've listed here and make sure that you're a good site for solar before you start talking to installers. Now, the good news is with roof types is that the technology for installing solar has come a long ways, and just about most roofs can handle solar. There's very, very few, maybe like your very old historic, like original Spanish clay tile. Like other than that, most roof types in Arizona can handle solar. For a sloped roof, that's often an asphalt shingle roof or a tile roof. Rails are going to be screwed onto your roof, and then the panels are basically clipped onto those beams so that they're angled right. If you have a flat roof, though, you can certainly go solar too. Your installer may use what's called a ballast system to essentially weigh the panels down so that they don't move anywhere. Or they may use what's called a pitch pocket system to make sure your panels are angled at the perfect optimal angle to absorb that most amount of electricity. But again, what you need to know is, your installer is going to figure all of that out for you. Most roof types can handle solar as long as they're in good condition. And then the last thing I'll talk about before I hand it over to Kate is our solar co-ops. This is really the bread and butter of what our organization Sun does here in Arizona. Imagine you and 100 of your neighbors all want to go solar. You all knock on a solar installer's door and say, hey, we all want to install solar. What kind of deal can you give us? That's essentially what we're organizing with a solar co-op. So we bring together a large group of homeowners in a similar geographic area. We educate them all about solar. We check out their roof. We make sure they have what they need. And then we request bids from solar installers on behalf of the group. Solar installers bid very good and discounted pricing in order to incentivize the group to choose them. And so this helps you get a bulk discount deal on your installation. And additionally, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're vendor neutral. So we have your back throughout the entire process from start to beginning to end. If you need any education, advice, or support going solar, or if you've already gone solar and you're running into issues and need some support there, these are all services that we provide for free for our co-op members. And if you happen to live in Pima County, we do have our Tucson Solar Co-op open right now for anybody who would like to join. Otherwise, we've got some more co-ops launching earlier next year. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kate.
Thanks, Adrian. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about when you're ready to get started on the process, what are some things you need to think about, some questions that you might want to ask. So first of all, you'll want to find an installer. And before you find an installer, you'll want to gather some information, mainly to give you an accurate bid. A solar company is going to need to know how much energy your usage is. And ideally, they're going to want to know what your usage is in detail for every month of the year so that they can give you an accurate estimate of how much energy you can, or how much money you can save on your bill and what size of a system is going to be the best fit for you and your home. So when it comes to choosing an installer, I recommend getting a few different bids. And that way you can compare and contrast the bids and look at what installers are offering, not only in terms of price, but size of the system, the equipment they're offering, those sorts of things. So that'll give you a couple different options to compare and choose from. And you can always reach out to Solar United Neighbors to have some help evaluating your bids if you have questions about what's in them. The other thing that's good to know about is what your utility programs are. And some utilities, like for example, APS, have a preferred installer program where they have a list of installers that have gone through some amount of kind of training about APS's, how APS's the way that APS bills customers for solar. So that's a good place to start if you want to a list to start from. Questions you might want to ask a solar installer. You might want to ask about their experience. Like, for example, how long have they been in business? Do they work locally or do they work across the country? And then you might want to ask, are they familiar with your local area? The process for getting a permit to install solar varies by city or county. And so that process of interconnecting your system to the grid depends on your utility. And it's not necessarily a problem if an installer hasn't worked with your utility or hasn't worked with your city before, but that interconnection process and the permitting process is one step along the way where things can get hung up. And so it's good to be clear on what's required. And if your installer has already done systems in your area, they'll be familiar with what the specific requirements are with your city and your utility, and they can give you a better idea of what to expect as far as timeline. Just like any other type of business, you can look for reviews. You can go to Better Business Bureau. You can look for recommendations on any neighborhood groups or websites that you're a part of. And then you should also be aware that there's some solar specific review websites out there that provide reviews of solar installers, but they're also lead generators. So examples are Energy Sage, there's solarreviews.com. So you might find these when you're Googling, solar installers in your area. And it's just good to know that if you provide them with your contact information, you might get contacted by more solar installers. So that may or may not be what you want at that point in your search, but just good to know. Another good question to ask is about a company's policy for labor warranties. Typically the equipment in a solar installation, so your solar panels, your inverters, that equipment is covered by a manufacturer warranty. So if a panel fails or if an inverter fails, it's covered by that manufacturer's warranty, regardless of who you install with. But there's a separate warranty for the company's labor and workmanship. So if there's something they do as part of the installation process that needs to be repaired down the road, you want to be sure the company is going to stand by their work and that they're offering a good labor or workmanship warranty. So look at those terms, and you can also ask whether that warranty is transferable to a new owner should you sell your home. And then, of course, for the company to be able to honor the warranty, they need to be in business a few years down the road if you have an issue. So, you can compare warranties across companies, but keep in mind that if a warranty offer seems too good to be true and the company doesn't have a long track record of doing business, you might be better off with a company that has a shorter warranty but is been in business for a long time, and you have more confidence that they'll be around to take your call if you do need anything down the road. And then last, there's some licensing and certification requirements that you can check. So you can ask for a company's registrar of contractors number, and you can use that to check they're in good standing with the registrar of contractors on their website. And then something else you should know is it's fairly common for solar installers to work with a separate sales company that is responsible for identifying people who might want to go solar and kind of making the pitch. So if you're working with somebody and they're part of a sales company, be sure to get the name of the solar company that they're working with that's doing the actual install. Because in some cases, the person who's kind of walking you through the sales process is not the same as the person who's going to show up at your door when it's actually time to install solar, and you want to know what company that is. Something else you can ask is how many employees have what's called a NABCEP certification, which is a National Solar and Storage Installation Certification. It's not required to install solar, but if you have a company has employees that are NABCEP certified, it's generally an indication that they're investing in training for their employees and that maybe they have more expertise in the field. And then last, there's some links on this site, or at the bottom of this slide, to some resources to the AriSEIA Solar Customers website, to SEIA, the National Solar Energy Industries Association Consumer Guide to Solar Power, and then Solar United Neighbors Go Solar Guide that will have some additional resources for you. So next, installation. Once you've chosen an installer, then they will work with you to customize the design of the installation for your home. And your solar installer will probably ask you to sign a contract before they begin any work. And once you sign the contract, they'll get started going ahead and ordering equipment, applying for permits, and then getting the installation scheduled on their calendar. The actual installation process where they come and, bolt the solar panels to your roof, that only takes 1 or 2 days typically. But some of the steps leading up to the install are what can really make the process take longer. So for example, getting the permit approved by your city or your utility to approve the installation can take longer. You might end up waiting for that. So the whole process could take, potentially a month, maybe longer, maybe a little bit less, just depending on your local government. Once the system is installed, your local government might also want to come inspect it. And then the utility will have to come once the installation is done to complete the final interconnection to the grid, where they actually replace your meter so that you can export power to the grid. So that whole process can take longer. And once the installation is complete, there shouldn't be any maintenance required. Most installers will actually recommend you don't do anything to try and maintain your solar panels. Rain is enough to keep them clean, and it's just not worth the risk of getting up on your roof or potentially damaging a panel because you're trying to clean it. And then last, once your installation is done, most solar installations include inverters that allow you to track the energy generation from your panels via an app. So that's a really great feature because you can tell right away if something's not working correctly and a panel isn't generating energy. And so if something does happen, you'll know right away, and it's easy to track and figure out if something does go wrong, which isn't very common. One of your top reasons for installing solar, probably your top reason, is to save money. So you probably want to know how much power are solar panels going to generate? How much am I going to save on my utility bill? This is where a solar installer can help you and provide a really specific estimate of generation and savings for a system that's designed for your home over the long term. How much can you save over 5, 10, 20 years? But if you want to look into it for yourself and get kind of a general idea, here's a few things you can do to start. So first, you can estimate how much power you can generate using an online tool called PV Watts. It's free, it's pretty easy to use, and what it will do is forecast solar generation based on your location. So it's not going to account for things like shading from trees or buildings. And that's something your installer can use more site-specific tools to help with. But it'll give you an idea of like what does a 5 kilowatt installation in Phoenix generate over the course of a year. And when it comes to savings, you also want to understand how your utility is going to credit you for the power. So this is very important because it varies by utilities. But there's two ways generally that you save money on your bills. First, during times when you're using energy and you're producing solar power, that power goes directly to power your home and your appliances. So you're not purchasing energy from the utility. And this is the best value you'll get from your solar. And how much you save by not purchasing energy from the utility depends on your utility and the rate that you've chosen. So take a look at your power bill and you can see how much you were paying per kilowatt hour. And it might vary depending on different times of the day, different seasons. But that's how much you can save for each kilowatt hour you generate yourself. Depending on your utility and what rate schedule you're on, it could be as much as 30 cents a kilowatt hour. And so those are the times when you are saving the most by generating power yourself. When you're not using energy, what happens to the power you generate, like Adrian said, is it gets exported to the grid. And so you receive a credit for each kilowatt hour that you export to the grid. And the value of that credit also varies by utility. So right now, it's about 6 cents for APS customers. It's about 5 cents for TEP customers, or about 3.5 cents for SRP customers. So for APS and TEP customers, the price that utilities pay you for power does step down over time, but you lock in the rate that's current when you install solar for 10 years. So, the rate that's effective when you install solar, you get that rate for 10 years, even though the rate for new customers will step down over time. So there's a lot of differences in the export rate policies for different utilities, and it's really, really important that your installer is considering the right export rate policies, and that you understand that to make sure you're getting the most value out of your system. And then last, if you're served by a different utility, like a municipal utility, make sure you check with the utility to see what their policy is. Next slide. Another important question that people often have is, should you add a battery? As battery storage has gotten more available, this is a really popular option, and it does add cost to the system. And you don't need a battery to install solar, but there are a lot of benefits that come with a battery. So first, a battery can help you maximize the value of your solar installation. If you can store energy at your home instead of exporting it to the grid at those lower export rates, you can use more of the energy online. You avoid having to pay higher utility prices, and you can maximize your savings from your system. And so second, you'll need a battery if you want to continue having power when the grid goes down. Typically, if you don't have a battery, your system won't generate power when the grid goes down, even if it's sunny out, if it's the middle of the day and the sun is shining. And the reason for that is that when the power is out, people are coming to work on the lines, and it's important not to have solar panels exporting power to the system, to the grid, to protect the safety of the people who are coming out to work on the lines. So you do need to set up your system specially to configure it to have power when the grid goes down. And if you want to have backup power during a grid outage, you need to think about what you want to be able to power, because it's going to be much less expensive to install a battery that powers, maybe a few critical appliances like your fridge, or, allows you to charge devices and keep a few things running, versus a battery that's been big enough to run, your AC all day in the summer, for example. So adds some complexity, but is becoming more and more popular as an option. And so just one more thing to say about kind of the exports and the battery is that, really because of the complexity of how you are compensated for energy, it's really important to maximize the value of solar, to try to be using the solar when it's most advantageous, when your power rates are most expensive. And so batteries are a tool that can help you with that, but there's also things like a smart thermostat can really help you by programming your AC to run, during times of the day when your solar generation is available, or programming it to run less during times of the day when your power is most expensive. So I think it's really helpful to understand not just how much power you use over the course of a month or a year, but when you're using power, when is it most expensive, and what can you do to kind of maximize the value of those free kilowatt hours from your roof to avoid the most expensive utility purchases. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about financing. And when it comes to paying for solar, many people choose to use a loan to finance the upfront cost of a solar installation. And so sometimes solar companies will come to you with a financing partner that they work with or that they recommend, but you can always go through a bank or a credit union as well. So you don't have to work with the option that the installer brings to you. And when you're considering a loan, make sure you're doing an apples to apples comparison across different options, because loans can be structured really differently in terms of, the length of the loan, the interest rates, and even the fees that are associated with it. So it's important to consider not just the interest rate, but also what fees are included, what's the structure. And sometimes these financing charges aren't obvious. So you might want to ask for the total cost of the loan, including all of the fees over the 5, 10, 15-year term of the loan. And that will let you compare what are you actually spending over the lifetime of the loan from one loan to another. Some loans are also structured to account for the tax credit, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So they might assume that you are going to get that tax credit when you file your taxes and apply it to the balance of the loan when you receive it, which is going to be, potentially a year or more after you installed solar. So that can be a good option because it allows you to use the tax credit to reduce the total amount that you owe over the lifetime of the loan by applying it to the principal. But you need to know if that's a condition of your loan, and make sure that you're planning for that. And then there's other purchasing options. Obviously, you can pay upfront with cash. Some companies also offer leases, which can be a good option for someone who's not eligible to receive the tax credits in particular. A lease allows the solar installer to kind of purchase the system, they install it on your roof, and then the installer takes the tax credit and they actually own and operate the system, which means they're also responsible for maintaining it. And in exchange, you pay a fixed monthly rate to lease the equipment, and then you benefit from the power generation. Something to consider with a lease is that if you sell your home, the new owner will have to take over the lease, or else you have to have the system removed if they don't want to. So it can really help, no matter how you finance the system, to keep copies of your monthly utility bill before and after solar, so you can show a potential buyer, here's the savings from this solar installation. Next slide. All right, tax credits. There's some changes here. So this is a really important thing to think about. Right now, there's a federal tax credit of 30% of the total cost of the system. That is not the case for very much longer. The tax credit has been accelerated. It now expires on December 31st, 2025. So for you to take that tax credit, your installation needs to be complete by the end of the year. So, it's already midway through October. I think a really important question to ask an installer upfront is, do you have space on your calendar for an installation before the end of the year? Some installers, might, some might not. And there are, it's just very important to get your installation done to take advantage of that tax credit. And then something else to know is a tax credit's non-refundable, which means you must owe at least as much in taxes as the value of the credit to claim the full amount. If you owe less than that in taxes, you won't get the full amount. Obviously, you'll just get what you owe back, but you can roll over the value of the tax credit to a future year. My understanding is that remains true, even though the tax credit eligibility for the tax credit expires at the end of the year. But, this is probably a really big consideration for you when it comes to the cost. And so highly recommend contacting a tax professional to confirm your eligibility, to confirm, how you're going to handle the tax credit. Just someone who understands your financial situation and can provide good advice on that front. There's an Arizona state tax credit of $1,000, and then Arizona also offers a property tax exemption and a sales tax exemption. So you don't need to pay sales tax on your purchase, and the value of solar won't add to the property taxes on your home. And then one other note about the tax credits. So the residential investment tax credit is expiring at the end of the year. There is a commercial solar tax credit that commercial solar installers are eligible for. And that expires later. It's available through 2027. And so, when I mentioned before that leasing might be an option that you want to look into, um, it might make more sense just depending on what options are available from solar installers that it might make more sense to install via a lease going forward once the residential tax credit expires, because the solar installer can take advantage of that commercial tax credit, which you can't take advantage of, and then pass the savings on to you through a lease. And then, like I said, that commercial tax credit is available longer. It's through the end of the year in 2027. So lots of changes right now in this space, and there's a lot that's different from how it's worked previously. So I think these are just really important questions to ask up front, understand, what you're eligible for, how it's going to affect your cost. And yeah, like I said, just highly recommend contacting a tax professional if you're counting on one of these tax credits.
Okay, thanks, Kate. I'm Autumn Johnson. I'm the executive director of the Arizona Solar Energy Industries Association, or AriSEIA. We're the state solar storage and electrification trade associations. We advocate for pro-renewables policies at every level of government. Our members have a code of ethics that they agree to comply with to be members. And then we also, as part of our consumer protection work, offer training such as this. A recording of one of the versions of this training is always available on our website, including English and Spanish slides. So Kate touched on a lot of these, but repetition is really important for retention. And so I'm just going to hit a few of these things again. Okay. And so one of the big questions that we get is concern about warranties. Should the installer go out of business? Solar is one of those things that's extremely volatile as far as policy changes. There's been a lot, as you've probably seen in the news, lots of policy announcements related to solar. And so unfortunately, companies do go out of business because policy has very direct real world outcomes that impact the viability of these businesses. So if your installer were to go out of business, the warranties that apply to the parts and the products, those still continue to exist. Any warranties from the manufacturer would still continue to exist. The warranties that are specific to the installation or labor warranties, those are usually a shorter in duration, but there are warranties that you can get from specific insurance products that are independent of the solar installer that you could consider. And that would include workmanship, wiring, things that have to do with the roof penetrations and that kind of thing. Anything with the panels and the inverters would be directly from the manufacturer. And then we have the years here. They are going to vary depending on the product and depending on the manufacturer. And then for the labor, they're going to depend either on the installer or the third-party insurer. Can we do the next slide, please? Okay, so most of what I'm going to be talking about are things that are going to be a little bit just reiterating some of the things that Kate brought up, but these are specific considerations and questions that we encourage you to ask installers. And the reason why this is our last training of the year, and we felt that it was really important to do it again before the tax credit changes, because that's going to potentially change either the economics of the purchase for you or whether or not you'd prefer to pursue a lease as opposed to an ownership model. So what we're talking about here are things that you're going to want to understand and either research or ask about, or call Solar United Neighbors' hotline to discuss before you sign to purchase solar. Arizona does have a specific waiting requirement, so there are a number of days after that you can change your mind about a solar contract, but we really recommend that you do all of this on the front end. You don't need to sign an agreement or buy solar like immediately just because someone's at your door. You really should do your homework, take your time, and then make the purchase that you think is right for you. And so you're going to want to understand things like the total cost of the system. Okay. When you get solar, whether it's own solar, through a loan, whether it's through a bank or it's through a third party kind of for-profit company, or it's a lease, it's going to impact the overall total cost of the system. And so you're going to want to understand things like the financing fees, like the interest rate, like any kind of escalators in a lease, right? If your lease agreement says that for the first 10 years, you're going to pay $150 a month, but for the second set of 10 years, you're going to pay $400 a month. Those are things that you're really going to want to understand and have eyes wide open about the total expense of the system over time. Same thing with interest rates are not apples to apples, right? So you might think that a 2% interest rate is better than an 8% interest rate. And that is true if all things are held constant. But if there are financing fees that are in addition to that 2%, or they've bought down that 2% with additional fees, you might end up paying more overall. And so I tend to tell people that it's as important to do homework on the lenders as it is on the installers. You don't have to do the lender, that's just sort of like paired with your installer. It's not like an automatic kind of thing. You can shop around for that separately, and you can get different quotes and actually compare them. And we do have a solar calculator link on our website, or in these slides, that you can kind of play around with a little bit. You're going to want to understand that export rate that Kate was talking about. Okay, that's going to vary dramatically between utilities, and it matters very significantly when you installed your solar, and you're going to want to make sure you understand those economics. Your installer should be able to explain that to you. They also should be able to kind of give you an estimate of utility rate increases over time. What I will say is sort of the math and the logic of that has changed dramatically recently. So it used to be that you could kind of predict, okay, the utilities always have sort of an average of 2%, increases over time, right? We're seeing like really dramatic load growth right now because of manufacturing and data centers. And so, we're kind of in anomalous territory as far as load growth goes. And so that could very well factor into the cost projections that they give you going forward, but they should indeed be able to project costs going forward for some amount of time with some amount of accuracy. They have modeling tools specifically for that. It's also going to be really important that you want to understand your electricity usage historically, but also you need to be thinking about things like you're going to do going forward, right? If you're about to have a baby, or you're contemplating an electric vehicle purchase, or you're about to electrify your water heater or your stove, those are all things that you're going to need to take into consideration. Your historic usage is not going to be predictive of future usage if you're talking about major changes like that. You're going to want to understand what the buyback period is for any kind of system that you buy. Is it going to take you 8 years to recoup? Is it 10 years? That's going to vary dramatically depending on the cost of the system and what utility you have. And so those are things that you're going to want to make sure that you discuss. You are also going to want to really understand if the battery question is very important as far as arbitrage when we're talking about when you are using power, like Kate mentioned, right? So if you're using power from APS and it's from 4 to 7 p.m., it's 3 times as expensive as it was at 3 p.m. Those are things that a battery is going to factor into that you're going to want to consider, but a battery is also going to factor into any kind of concerns about outages. If you have solar, but you do not have a battery, if there's a power outage in your neighborhood, it's going to apply to you as well. Even though you generate your own power, they're going to shut that all down if there's an outage for safety reasons, and you only get to island if you have a battery. So those are things to keep in mind. Different batteries have different capabilities. A number of batteries you have different capabilities. And so you cannot just assume that because you have a battery that your entire system is going to function and you're going to have HVAC from 4 to 7 p.m. in July, right? It's maybe is not going to be enough power to cover that kind of usage. And so those are things you're going to really want to talk about with your installer. I would just say the last thing on this before we move on is I really think that it's important for people to really understand how their electric bills work and to understand the different components of their bills. A lot of calls that I get about people is sort of basic confusion over what their bill says, what their utility is trying to convey to them, and how that relates to their solar. And so companies like APS have really improved their bills, and you can see things like what your export rate is, how much on-peak power you're using, how well your system is performing, relative to the same month last year. That is all really critical information that lets you know the health of your system, but also how well you're utilizing it. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. It's important to know when you're going to be starting your payments relative to when you can expect to start seeing reductions because of generating your own power. Okay, and that is going to vary very much depending on your lender. So I did the Sun Co-op when I got solar, which I highly recommend because they are taking a lot of the vetting of the installers out of it. You still have to vet your own lender though, right? And the lenders are going to have different policies. My lender specifically did not start charging me until I actually signed a statement that said that my system had been installed, it was functioning, it had been interconnected, everything was working. And then I give them the green light, and then that's when I start paying. That's not going to be the case with all lenders. And so those are things that you really need to be asking about for both the installer and the lender. You're going to really want to understand if there are any other components that are going to have to either be upgraded or construction that's going to have to be done for your system. There are weird things that can come up that are sort of specific to you and your circumstance. Like, for instance, there are specific rules that are different for each utility about where things like an emergency shutoff switch are. Like, can you have that behind a fence, or does it have to be on the front of your house? Like, are you going to have to tear up a sidewalk to do some of the interconnection work? Do you have to have a panel upgrade that's going to require your power being shut off for up to half a day? Those are all things that you're going to want to talk about with your installer so that you are not surprised as you go through the process. They also can make the install period take longer. We talked already about warranties. You want to talk about transferability of warranties, and you might want to explore the solar insurance options on the front end before you proceed. We really don't recommend sort of aesthetic or sort of voluntary maintenance or things, adding water to the panels to rinse them off adds more hard water, which is actually counterproductive to production. But you are going to want to understand, especially if it's a lease system, what happens if the panels do need to be removed for some reason, either because there's a malfunction or because you have some sort of roof issue that happens later. Just because you have a roof issue that happens after you installed solar does not mean that it's the fault of solar. Things happen. I actually had a roof leak after I installed solar, and it was because of an HVAC issue where they had not properly sealed the HVAC installation. And so there might be a reason why panels would need to be removed. A roof lasts 20 to 30 years. That's roughly how long your solar panels last. And so it's possible you'd have to do a roof replacement. If your roof is not brand new when you install your solar, it's very possible that you might have to do roof maintenance or roof replacement at some point during the life of your panels. So you're going to have to take those panels off and then put them back on. And you're going to want to understand, especially if it's a lease, how that's going to work and who's responsible for it. Is the performance of the system monitored, and by whom? Usually it's not. I think this is what's really shocking to people. People think that there's some sort of, guardian angel out there that's just like keeping track to make sure that your system is working and that everything is copacetic. That I like to tell people that solar is more like a car. It's not like a water heater. If you install a water heater, you don't do anything to it, right? It's just there. Maybe you get it flushed once a year or once every couple of years by your plumbing company, but for the most part, you're not really thinking about it. You're not doing a lot of maintenance on it. Solar is not like that, okay? You need to be monitoring it like you would a car. And so everybody is either going to have an app that comes with their solar that's either from the inverter company or it's from your solar leasing company, and that will tell you your production. It's extremely important to check that regularly and also to understand how to use it, because it tells you not just that your system's working, but when you yourselves are using power, which is going to have a dramatic impact on your bill. You're not going to be saving a lot of money even if you get solar, if you triple your electricity usage after you get solar, or you pay no mind to time of use rates and you're just running your washing machine and charging your EV and running your pool pump and running your dishwasher and cooking dinner at 5 p.m. If you're doing those things, you're going to have colossal bills regardless of whether or not you have solar. And so the app tells you what your usage is relative to your production at any time of day, and that's really critical information. It will also reflect to you how your system is producing. If it's cloudy, it's obviously going to be producing less than if it's sunny. If you see, pattern changes over time, like why is it that I always, hit 7 kilowatts at noon and like suddenly for the last 3 weeks, it's flatlined. That's a problem. The utility is not just going to call you to tell you that. Those are things that are going to be kind of on you to monitor. If you have a lease, for the most part within your lease, you're going to have a performance guarantee that's usually averaged over some period of time. Could be 3 years, could be 1 year. It's going to depend depending on the lease. That's a situation in which, if your system is not producing as it was promised, that you would take that up with your leasing company and will usually be reimbursed. even if you own your panels, for the most part, you are going to have some sort of production sort of baseline in there. And if you're not meeting that over time, that's something that you're going to want to talk about with them. If your installer has gone out of business since you have installed, that's something you might want to be talking about with a third party. We have a member, for example, that their entire thing is to work on systems for companies that have gone out of business. That's their entire business model. And so those are companies you might be talking to if you're in a situation in which your installer is no longer operating. We've already talked about how long the installation takes, but those are things that you can certainly talk about with your installer. You can also talk about, who to reach out to if something goes wrong. You can make sure that you do have, basic contact information for the installer themselves, not just the sales company. And of course, we already talked about this, but it's really important that you get multiple quotes. If you're not going to go the co-op route with Sun, in which they're getting multiple responses for requests for proposals, then you're going to want to we recommend at least 3 proposals from companies, and you're going to want to make sure that you're, comparing the details, not just the top line numbers, because what they include, warranties, panel upgrades, roofing work, cement work, EV chargers, the level of installs, the quality of the panels, all of those things are going to vary. And so you want to make sure that you're comparing the details and not just the aggregate number. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. The whole point of this training is to try to help you do your due diligence on the front end so that you're buying something that has 5 stars, like an Amazon review, and not 1 star. Okay, that is the entire point of this. We want people to make informed decisions, because solar can be an amazing resource. I very much believe that there are only 2 ways to control your electric bill, really, and those are solar or energy efficiency mechanisms, right? And so solar is one of the best ways to not only reduce your bill, but to have some sort of bill stability going forward. But not all, just like not all cars are created equal. Not all, you've probably all had HVAC companies come out because something's worked. They're not all created equal. The one by your home warranty company might be terrible, but the one you employ by yourself might be good. And that's the same for solar. And so there is some amount of vetting that needs to be done. These agencies listed on here are the people that you would contact if something goes wrong. Okay, and so this is where you could file a complaint for different kinds of things. Better Business Bureau, you can file a complaint for basically any kind of business practice. The Register of Contractors is where you would be filing a complaint if something was specifically wrong with the installation, there was some kind of mechanical problem, a technical problem, those kinds of things are going to go through ROC. The Attorney General's office is where you're going to go if you feel there was some sort of fraud, some problematic sales practice, misinformation, those kinds of things. That's where you would go through the AG's office. Now, Solar United Neighbors also has a hotline that we have links to in the materials, as well as on our website, and they can just answer questions for you. They can answer questions for you before the install. They can answer questions for you if you've had solar for 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. It's an excellent resource. It's totally free, and they're not trying to sell you anything. So it's really important to be aware of those resources and to utilize them, when it best suits you. Next slide, please. Oh, this is a new slide. So this, interesting. These are some QR codes that are in here just to make it a little bit easier. I have not seen the ground mounted solar one. Adrian, what is that link to?
That's a great question. It was in the slide deck, so I added it. But it's like an FAQ about page about ground mounted solar.
Okay. It's important to know that Tucson Electric Power, if that's your installer, will also be launching a preferred installer program that should be available to consumers starting in the new year. And so, not obviously there are about 10 or so utilities in the state, but the 3 largest ones are TEP, APS, and SRP. It's going to be the vast majority of customers in the state are going to be one of those. All 3 of them are going to have preferred installer programs. It doesn't mean that you need to use an installer in one of those programs, but that you might want to get a quote of at least one of those companies. And so, when you're picking your 3 to get quotes from, I would encourage one of them probably to be a participant in the preferred installer program. It doesn't mean that because they're not in the program, they're not good, because there are sort of specific requirements. And if you're not doing a ton of installs in that service territory, or, it's a new program like TEPs and, you just haven't gone through the process yet. There are reasons why you could be an excellent installer and not participate. Sometimes they sort of drop their lists and then build them again. And so there's some amount of sort of like regulatory burden to participate that may or may not be worth it for the installers. But I think getting a quote from at least one of them is wise. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and we seem to have lost our other slide with the links to the Go Solar guides from SIA and Sun, but I will drop those in the chat. So sorry about that.
Okay, and they're also on the AriSEIA Solar Customers website as well. And then this is the contact information for everyone that's presenting today. So you're going to be getting an email from Solar United Neighbors with the slides and the recording. But if you need to reach out to any of us for specific questions, the slides that we covered, or other things that you see that we're working on, feel free to do so.
Wonderful. Thank you, Autumn and Kate. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And do we have any questions from folks? If you do have a question, feel free to drop that in the chat, or there's also a Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen. We'll hang out here for just a couple more minutes if there are any other questions.
Maybe while we're waiting, I'll just add, I think two things. One is that, the tax credit changes are very significant. It's very important to understand that if you are looking to procure solar, certainly by the end of the year. But if you're going to do a lease, even beyond that period. And so asking a lot of questions from both the installer, Sun's hotline, your accountant, whomever, is going to be really important. I would not just take the word from someone, that you don't know that's trying to sell you something, right? It's really important to vet that information. There are very significant changes coming to tax credits at the end of the year, and it's really important to understand how that could apply to you. I also will just say that whether or not a lease is right for you is something that you really need to evaluate. Just because it's a lease doesn't mean that it's bad. And just because it's a lease doesn't mean that it's good, right? And so you would need to very much review the details of that. And if you're getting quotes, get quotes of 3 leases and run those by Sun, who will review up to 3 quotes for you to make sure that what the terms in there are fair. So there are a lot of people in rural Arizona that do get power from APS. So APS is like in 11 of the 15 states, I think. But co-ops are all going to have their own rules. They're all going to be regulated by the ACC, so that is going to be the same. But every single utility has a different export rate. They're all going to have different interconnection manuals. But the mechanics of how it works and what you would want to ask your installer and all of that is the same regardless of who your utility is. And any installer that you have is going to be working in that service territory, and they should be able to model the payback period for you and the economics of it regardless of the utility.
Yeah, and likewise, if you need any help understanding your local rural electric co-op or other utilities rate plans or how solar works, you can also reach out to Sun. We're happy to help you with that too.
For the most part, the export rate for the co-ops is going to be significantly less than it is for APS or TEP, but probably still more than SRP. So, SRP is like kind of the lowest export rate in the state, but many of the co-ops are at or are very close to avoided cost. So you're going to be more in the 3 to 4 cent range than the 5 or 6 cent range like you're seeing with APS and TEP.
Awesome. Alrighty, last call. Any last questions? I see you answered a couple in the Q&A. Thanks, Kate. Going once.
Yeah, and our emails are in there as well. So if you think of something later, you have our contact info and can reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, well, we'll close it here. Thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate you sitting with us and hopefully learning something new about solar. And yeah, if you need something, reach out. We're here for you. Thanks.